Lou? Yeah. We're good? Yeah. Okay, let's have a seat. We're going to get going on our next session. Jessica, Bret, and Heather. How'd your meeting go? Was it good? Good. Good. White tie. I got white tie and tails.
Oh, or you could turn the cape inside out. Is it red? Or just somebody else?
Yeah. That was the fashion during the Spanish Inquisition. All right, come on up. Have a seat.
Do you
All
care?
right, we're going to talk a little bit about
You
science.
guys sit and I'll follow you. Oh,
Yeah,
look, I can hear
spontaneous order. I don't plan this. We can run this like a Dark Horse podcast if you'd like to.
I have to watch my skirt.
I got to take off the
I can't
cape.
sit like that.
You can't sit like that?
No, like,
You can
A
get
normal
lessons.
person? Would you be better off here where you could angle
we're all looking
yourself?
forward to seeing Joe
no, I'm
Try
fine.
tomorrow,
I like
right?
sitting
He's
on the
coming
edge of
in.
my chair anyway.
We're going to see Joe
Fast
tomorrow.
getaways.
That's great.
It fits the era.
Okay, let's open this up first. This is going to be like a Dark Horse podcast here with Bret Weinstein and Heather Hine and Jessica Rose. And do you watch the Dark Horse podcast all the time? I mean, they've been carrying this thing for. How long has it been running? 5 years, right?
That was a fun.
It's been running 5 years, has it? Something like that?
2019 was the official start, but
Wow.
really, obviously, COVID kicked it into high gear.
Yeah, and it's still going well, is it?
It is
Okay.
The dark horse is still in the running.
still in the running.
Jessica, I wonder if we could just kick it off by giving us an update on your paper on DNA contamination of the shots that finally made it into a peer-reviewed journal, as they say, and hopefully we can talk about what that even means anymore. But then the retraction buzzards began to circle.
So, I'm Jessica. I'm a researcher. I have backgrounds in math and biology, basically. I've had the extreme pleasure of teaming up with Kevin McKernan, who's a genomics expert, and David Speaker, who's an immunologist from Canada, to do a study where we simply took some of the Pfizer and Moderna vials, and we're talking expired ones from years ago to right up to the XBB-JN vials, which are the new ones. And we looked for DNA. That's all we did. And we found DNA in every single one of the vials. So we wrote it up. And we didn't only find DNA in all of the vials. We found excessive levels, which far exceed the so-called EMA threshold. The thing about that is that the threshold's already way too high because it's based on naked DNA, which has about a 10-minute half-life. And what we're talking about here with this new technology, which is experimental, is lipid nanoparticle encapsulated DNA. So it's, the modus operandi of these things is to very efficiently transfer genetic material into cells. So if there's DNA at these levels, it's first of all, we were explicitly told that these things were only RNA-based. So there's never going to be a problem with interference with our genome or integration. That's problematic. I'm trying to follow the thought, but before I continue, one of the fragments or the specific types of DNA that we found only in the Pfizer vials is something called SV40 promoter enhancer. This comes from the simian virus. So it's not the entire virus, it's this promoter, which is a very strong mammalian promoter. It has no role being in these these products as a promoter, because we have something called a T7 promoter to function as the promoter for the production process. It is actually a nuclear localization sequence used in gene therapy. What that means is that we use it on the bench in order to efficiently traffic molecules to the nucleus of cells. It's very functional. I'll get to the stuff about Health Canada eventually, but I'll finish the story. So we finally got this paper published after 5 desk rejections, which means that the paper was just outright rejected by the journal. Finally, one agreed, called autoimmunity, and it took a long time. It was about 2 years we were going through this. Finally, we got it published. Immediately, we were descended upon by who we're calling the pub smear crew. There's this group of people called Pub here. It's like a website where you can go on, and this group of people just basically nitpick any piece of work that's been published, especially ones that counter narratives, mainstream narratives, and they vie to get the articles retracted. So it wasn't even a week, and it's up on PubMed too. It wasn't even a week that it was up that we got a notice from the editor that it was formally under investigation now because of the whiners in the pub smear community. They're terrible people, and they're paid to do this. So as of 3 days ago, we got a follow-up email that said the investigation is definitely ongoing, and this is the preface to retraction. And Kevin's actually been explicitly told, and he screenshot this, that these people look forward to retracting this paper. So it probably will get retracted. I'm not surprised. I made this announcement at the Polyface retreat because the evidence therein is damning from every point of view, like from a fraud point of view. So that's the long and short of it so far.
Can I just add the same thing I added at Polyface? Fraud is the thing to track, because at the moment you prove fraud, their immunity from liability disappears. So that is the reason that anything and everything will be thrown at this in order to prevent it from landing, is because once we prove fraud, it's not clear that there continues to be a Pfizer.
And I just want to add something, because it's a perfect segue from what you just said. Health Canada were apprised very quickly after the first discovery of DNA was made by Kevin in his lab. We got ATIPs, which are Canadian versions of FOIAs, of emails between Health Canada officials, EMA, FDA. I'm not sure TGA was involved, but they were very aware of what we found. And in these emails, we saw them writing the words, we checked and we verified that this SV40 was actually in the sequence way back when. They blasted it, they found it. And there are people within these agencies, they're not all bad guys. They're asking the right questions, like, should we have acted upon this sooner? What should we do about this? Like, they seem genuinely concerned, because to me, this is an existential crisis. Because by the way, this is an important point. This finding is not ours alone. It's been found and published in many different journals and labs around the world. This is reproduced work, and every single vial that's been tested has some amount of DNA that's over this already too high EMA limit. So Health Canada knew about this years ago. It was 2023. This was published by Epoch, Noé Chartier, a citizen journalist. So the fact that they keep going, this is the fraud part. They keep going. They keep pushing the fact that these things are safe. And one of the quotes that one of the Health Canada officials stated on record was that SV40 is non-functional. And this is actually a lie. It's a lie, because There's no evidence to support that statement. First of all, if you're going to make a statement and a claim like that, you have to prove it with data, which you can't do. And it is a gene therapy tool. Read David Dean's work. It's quite functional. It's a very powerful promoter. So
Can I jump in with a little context that may be missing for people who
Yep.
don't speak this language?
Sorry.
The fraud actually begins before the denial that the SV40 promoter is there in too high a quantity or whether it's functional. The fraud starts with the idea that to the extent that any safety testing was done on these products at all, it was done on a version of them that was produced without the step that introduces the DNA at all.
This is very important.
So they tested a product. It wasn't safe even in their testing. But then the version that they gave the public had been put into a new production process that allowed it to be scaled up very rapidly, and they injected that into people untested. So that's the major fraud here. And then you get into all the details about how much is too much and whether or not it's functional. But just the simple fact that there was a bait and switch. They told us safe and effective based on something that they tested at small scale, and then they scaled the process up using DNA, which introduces a whole bunch of new risks. Didn't tell us that that happened, and then, we're only able to find it out because of the testing of leftover, stuff in vials. So it's a fraud from one end to the other.
And this was published by Josh Ketzko at the Hebrew University and Retzef Levy, our famous Retzef Levy now in the BMJ. They called it the bait and switch. So they actually did test the commercial product on 250 whole people and one lot, but then they put it into billions. This is probably one of the most important points. So if anyone wants to ask later, because we want Heather to talk too about the difference between what they put into people in the clinical trials, which are also crap, and what they put into people in the commercial vials, two different things, man. Different product, new trials.
This feels to me like a perfect example of what Bret has dubbed the Cartesian crisis, wherein you know what you've discovered and what is true. And there are many of us in this room that can assess your work independently while having to trust that you did the work that you claim to have done, but that we can do the same interpretation that you have done on the results that you have to have done behind, secretly, because we don't have access to all the same data. But for the vast majority of people, the story is just too complicated. Mm-hmm. Right? The scientific story is just too complicated, and there's this conflation of, oh, well, that's because science is complicated, and I don't do science, and so I guess I just have to take the experts' words for it. And that's how we get to a place where people say, I don't know, I can't, there's no way for me to do that, I was never good in science anyway. And so as soon as there's jargon, as soon as there's complication in the story, as soon as there's any kind of narrative chaos, people throw up their hands and go, I guess I'll just be afraid when they tell me to be afraid. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whereas, what you say, that like the germ of the story for me that is the most striking is it doesn't just replicate. Your result doesn't just replicate. It replicates many times. It replicates every time. You said every time anyone has looked, they have found this contamination. Replication is one of the key hearts of science. If the result replicates, it is like, I'm going to try not to speak in terms of verification, but we have ever greater evidence that what you're saying is true.
But even based simply on the precautionary principle, if even one credible lab found this result, everything has to stop. A moratorium has to immediately come into place. And we have to figure out, first of all, we have to verify. We have to figure out if what we found is actually it's a representative sample of the larger pool. So billions of vials, maybe it's more than that, were produced, and billions were put into people. So this is the other thing that pisses me off. In Canada, at least, there was an order by the federal government to destroy an entire batch or batches of XBB product because we're not going to use them anymore. We have new ones. And it's like, no. that's destruction of evidence, in my opinion, because if you want to destroy those, I have a better idea. Why don't you give them to labs so that we can sequence them? We want to know what's in these things in terms of the genetic material, not just the DNA, but the modified mRNA as well, because we still, there's no like consensus mRNA in these things, and we don't know how many mRNAs are actually in these things. So even the original recipe that they told us, was going to be injected, injected into us, we still don't know if that part is correct. So, yeah.
I want to point out, I think we have gotten into a bad habit, we in the health freedom movement, of playing defense. We're so used to the onslaught that comes at us that we don't realize how powerful our hand is. And in this case, what you have shown is that population of billions was denied informed consent.
Yep.
Now, there's a flaw in the way informed consent was initially formulated at Nuremberg. And the flaw is it technically only applies to things that are experimental. Now, I would argue, as a complex systems biologist, you can't intervene in the human body and not be running an experiment. So informed consent should apply to everything. But you could make an argument that the product that they safety tested was tested enough that it wasn't covered by informed consent. But not if they injected you with something that they hadn't tested. So the point is, it was very clearly an experiment on billions of people. What happens when you violate informed consent? I don't know, but in 1947, we hung 7 doctors over that violation. So the idea that we are talking about a hanging offense for which we have very solid evidence should embolden us, and we should stop playing defense, in my opinion.
Is there a consensus here that there was an attempt somehow to privilege modified mRNA technology in the inoculation once they became available and deprecate all the more traditional vaccines? And that also would account for why hydroxychloroquine was taken off the market, ivermectin and everything. So we were left with only one option, which was the mRNA. And if you agree with that, which it seems like all evidence points that direction, the other question is, basically why?
Okay, I can answer that. Well, are we in consensus?
Well, I think, there's still things we don't know. We can see that there is a scam when it comes to these shots. What we don't know is whether that scam was primed and awaiting an opportunity to deploy it, whether or not the shenanigans around the emergence of the virus was actually planned. We don't know the answers to those questions. So I think we can only answer what was the purpose within the bounds of things that are certain. But you wanted to take a crack at that.
Well, but just to back up slightly, AstraZeneca was never approved here in this country, even though they trialed it here, right? J&J was, but then Fauci started yammering on, no, look, we found, it's giving you blood clots. We have to take it off the market. Well, that killed the market for the one and done shot, right? Leaving us only Moderna and Pfizer, and there's one other.
But I think that was also planned. Like they were thrown under the bus to leave, the door open for these.
This is not just
the one and done shot that did not carry the major hazard of the stabilized mRNA, which now we see persists for months and years in many people. So the J&J shot, for all of its flaws, and I do think it was flawed and dangerous in its own right, just simply didn't have a bunch of these flaws because it wasn't part of this mRNA platform, which, the flaws of which can't be solved.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes sense with my hypothesis about this being a segue. So I have something scary to tell everyone. So if you don't read my Substack, I wrote this up recently, but I'll fill you in. There's a paper published in Science very recently. Barrick's one of the authors, if you don't know who he is.
Less famous than Fauci, Barrick, but probably
yeah, but more insidious.
more insidious. Yeah.
So this paper outlines a proof of concept work. It's only in mice for now. It's a trial where they've taken this new experimental platform that involves the lipid nanoparticles and the nucleoside modified mRNA, and it is nucleoside modified, and they've added a new ingredient. They've added the coding material for a scaffold, which is basically going to result in the formation, your cells, producing by translation these, I imagine they're going to be little spherical bodies with holes in them, let's just say that, which can be studded with whatever protein you want to stud them with. So the proof of concept involves the RBD from spike, and believe it or not, they're using HIV peptides. I don't know why yet. I haven't read the paper to conclusion yet because I need to think about this. But the only thing I can think of, the only reason I can think of they would be doing this is they're thinking about developing, finally, a new HIV vaccine. They've been trying to do that for decades. It hasn't worked. There's a good reason for that. But because of where my head is at right now, after 5 years of this, and by the way, my head was not here 5 years ago. I was like, I had no problem with anything before this all happened. They've just completely handed over the concept of trust. So I don't think, my suspicions would be that they wouldn't even tell us the next time they're going to push this platform on us, and they're going to call it, look for these words, plug and play. They're going to switch out the coding material for whatever antigen they want. Oh, look, we have a new vaccine against SARS and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And they're probably, no, I'm not going to say probably. I have to be reserved. It's possible that they're going to include coding material that we're not going to be aware of. I mean, one of the hugest problems with all of this is lack of informed consent, lack of telling us the truth about biodistribution of these lipid nanoparticles. That thing they told you about it staying at the injection site, it was so wrong from the beginning. I mean, an intramuscular injection is an intramuscular injection because you got blood supply there, and it's going, whatever you inject is going to go around the body. And these lipid nanoparticles are slippery little bastards. They're 100 nanometers across, and the design of these things is to go wherever you want, unless they're specific and you tag them with a specific protein to target, say, the liver. So by their nature, they go everywhere in the body. And I just want to throw in that there was a study done in 2012. Same technology, this lipid nanoparticles, same Wistar rat model, and it definitively shows that these things traffic to the ovaries of the rats and accumulate. This is something that was known like a long time ago. So no one can tell me that, the people in the development world of these things didn't know this and anticipate or easily anticipate that this was going to be a problem.
So again, I don't think we should be playing defense on this.
Okay.
It was implausible from the start that it was going to stay in the deltoid, which means they knew.
Yeah, it was a lie.
They lied to us. Further, the Dark Horse podcast was demonetized and remained demonetized for, close to 5 years?
4 years.
For the episode in which Steve Kirsch pointed to that exact study on biodistribution. The point is, this was something the public must not know, and it was enough for them to go to war against us at the point that this was being aired in public. So they knew, which means, A, there's an obvious fraud here. We don't have to be shy about pointing that out. The evidence is everywhere. And B, think about what they're on the hook for, right? That violation of our informed consent was something that has now resulted in who knows how many million major adverse events, including a huge number of people who have died spontaneously. So what they're on the hook for is awfully serious, and they are depending on the fact that the threshold for understanding it is just far enough that the public will let it go, right? It's very easy for people who have technical sophistication to see it, but it's very hard for us to convey it to the public, and that is the reason that they are, still pushing these shots, amazingly enough. How can that be, right? If this had been anything like a mistake, the discovery of how dangerous these things are would have caused them to reverse course, and it didn't.
At what point?
Well, I don't know. I would be comfortable with it at any point. That would be at least some evidence that somebody in the chain of command was surprised.
So the reason I asked that is just going back to my own memories of this, I always thought that the shot was, just frankly ridiculous. It's a fast mutating virus. Coronavirus is the sort of virus against which you cannot vaccinate. So yeah, I sort of presumed that, and got in a lot of trouble for calling it some sort of weird potion, all right? But I did not expect that it would be harmful, okay? So that was me, naive. But at some point, it just became a little bit ominous between the VAERS reports and the sudden deaths everywhere and just stories from friends and family. So I'm curious that what was your attitude, like Heather, what was your attitude toward, what did you expect? And at what point did you realize, oh, this is getting serious?
With regard to the vaccine?
Yeah, the injury. And death. Yeah. The vaccine, right.
Well, this is going to sound like a non sequitur to begin with, but I think part of what we are experiencing societally is downstream of this STEM acronym. Science, technology, engineering, and math is not one thing. And it's not really four related things in some ways. Science is its own thing. And technology and engineering are product-driven, are goal-driven things that are often downstream of science, and all of them involve math. But again, this is just going to be my drumbeat throughout. Every human being has a right to be a citizen scientist. We are all citizen scientists, and most of us have been compelled that you won't understand this. This is outside of anything that you can imagine, and therefore you need to leave it to the experts. And that is actually, to some degree, true with regard to the tech and the engineering, and maybe even the math, but not for the science. Because the scientific thinking, which is what you were doing, when you were saying, wait a minute, I don't think you can vaccinate against the coronavirus. I don't know what all you had in your head, but you had a number of things in your head that you were building a model, and you went, if A, then B, we can't get to C. And no, to get to an earlier point of yours from this morning, I can know that I am seeing evidence of SARS-CoV-2 and that it's a different kind of thing and that it's bad. And I can see the solution that you're proposing and say, your solution is wrong. And that does not mean that I deny the reality of the virus, right? That is a particular kind of logical trap they set for us over and over and over again during COVID, right? Yeah. If you don't believe in our solution, then you don't think there's a problem. Nope. I can logic through with, frankly, scientific tools, basic scientific tools that all of us have, that there seems to be evidence of a virus. And no, I haven't seen it, right? But there really does seem to be evidence of a virus that is quite different from any other viral disease that any of us have ever seen. And none of the solutions that are being pushed, and yes, it was mRNA all the way, right? Yes. It wasn't just the, we can't do the repurposed drugs, we're going to make fun of Trump for talking about bleach, and we're going to, ivermectin's out, and J&J is out. And it wasn't just, it was all of those things. It was, we have one solution, that's it. And it was the complete demonizing of those of us who talked about any other solutions from first principles, from just, again, basic scientific thinking.
Common sense.
What strikes me, though, is that if I knew that from reading, Viruses for Dummies, whatever, surely the masters of the COVID plan knew that also.
Yes.
Do you agree with this? I thought for a long time that they believed that they were going to inoculate their way out of a pandemic. Now I don't believe that anymore. but I'm not sure what the thinking was.
Look, I don't think you can be too audacious in imagining. I'm not saying that everybody knows. My guess is if you were actually to census the true beliefs of the people who work inside of Pfizer, most of them probably think that they're on the right side of making people healthier and all of that. The question is the C-suite, right? The C-suite is making the decisions about what's going to be deployed and what sort of cover story they're comfortable with, and how the testing is going to be arranged that produces results that can be championed as if they imply their product is safe and effective. So I truly do not believe that the C-suite is at all in the dark. They are playing this game far too well relative to where the bodies are buried. They know. They knew they weren't going to vaccinate their way out of a coronavirus-based pandemic.
It's absurd.
Well,
But the
it's
foot
absurd on
soldiers-
multiple fronts. Not only is it too fast evolving for that plan to work, but they're vaccinating you in the deltoid for something where you need your immunity to be mucosal. They're pretending that antibodies are a good measure of immunity when they are the loosest possible proxy. In fact, the presence of antibodies can be negative. You can have antibody-dependent enhancement, and the presence of antibodies is bad.
That's three. You made three devastating points.
And the point, look, I am embarrassed at how long it took me to figure out what was going on at that level. I'm embarrassed that it took me months to spot this stuff. But if this is your bread and butter, if this is the subject you study, none of these things are hard to understand from the get-go. And I'm probably going to regret saying this. But
No, sorry, go on.
well, here's the thing I'm going to regret saying. There are a whole bunch of people who had a leg up and spotted the nonsense right away. They are the people that were dismissed as anti-vaxxers. Why did they have a leg up? Because they'd seen all of these tricks in so many different places that the point is, okay, it's a variation on a theme they're well familiar with. So those of us who were believers in vaccines generally, and I certainly was in that camp, were too credulous at the beginning. And the learning process was absolutely painful.
Exactly.
But really our mistake was in trusting the accusation against the anti-vaxxers. First of all, I've now met these people. Many are in the room, right?
Put up your hand.
Hands go up. That's
Right. So, there's a reason that there are so many so-called anti-vaxxers, and it's because there's so much carnage downstream of vaccine technology that I'm not saying that's inherent. I would love to believe that there could be vaccines that would be worth injecting, but it doesn't mean that the industry has produced such vaccines, and it doesn't mean that the stories they use to sell us vaccines are true. So, anyway, I now get that I was dismissing a lot of people based on a ghost story about them rather than about their actual nature, and I'm going to try really hard never to do that.
That's so interesting. But you knew. But Heather, you were going to say something?
Nope.
Okay. But you knew what everybody knew. At least my mother knew it. I mean that. When I was growing up, Mom said, "Well, they don't have a vaccine against the common cold." Okay. So why is that? It's because it mutates too quickly, and it just doesn't. That's like a basic point, and yet this one comes along, a coronavirus. Oh no, we're going to invent the great shot, and it seems. Well, I'm going back to what I said before. I'm not sure anybody really believed that they were going to vaccinate their way out of this problem. So then it raises the question: what was the purpose of this? And I guess the answer is profit. I mean,
well, let's
It's
follow this
also
through
testing
sort
the
of.
population.
yeah,
Testing the population for
Testing the
compliance.
population for
now
compliance,
they know.
yeah.
Now they know which of us don't comply.
yeah.
Well, and making us compliant. If we think about what Walter was getting at this morning, this virus, which I think is a very scary thing because we're now stuck with a new human pathogen and it does unique kinds of damage. I don't want to underrate the damage of this thing, but it is not a highly deadly pathogen, and it never was, right? But if you play a game, right, let's imagine that they were totally cynical. They understood that this thing wasn't that serious, but they understood it as a business opportunity. So we're going to make it absolutely terrifying, right? We're going to prime people with those grainy videos from Wuhan of people collapsing in the subway. We're going to prime the medical establishment that they are about to be on the front lines. They're going to be dropping like flies, and they're going to be heroes for confronting this thing courageously. So they are all expecting this super deadly pandemic to cross the ocean, right? You get them primed, and then you deploy this goofy-ass vaccine that doesn't work. But the fact that you've overrated the danger of the virus means that you can actually fake the solution that came in the potion that they injected, right? It makes it look like, well, okay, I guess the thing's not that serious. Look at how low the death rate, the case fatality rates become. The vaccines are heroic. Yeah. And so if the purpose was, we've got an mRNA platform, it's way too dangerous to be used on humans, we need an event that normalizes it. Once it's normalized, then the world is our oyster because we've got
subscription models. Yeah.
Yeah, we can build any new vaccine. We could take all the stuff
without subsequent trialing.
Right. We can claim that the safety testing was already done on the original thing, and the only thing
they're already doing that.
They are doing that.
Of course. And the fact that they are undaunted by the damage they've done tells us that A, they're monsters, and B, they understood the damage that these things were going to do, and they didn't care.
I think you're right about pushing the envelope. I think that's what they were doing. And what they ended up getting was an enormous amount of data on us, which is all, very, it's important for what's coming in the future. And I think it was very much about these vaccine passport things, because this is all linked to the CBDC thing that's coming down the pipeline and turning us all into automatons. So I think you're right. I think they did it to learn about us, and boy, did they learn about us.
Yeah, it's public health profiling in service of a greater kind of profiling.
Yep.
Let me ask a big question, because we're actually running out of time on this panel, but I just want to ask each of you to comment. Look, what has been done to science over the last 5 years, and what have you learned, and what needs to be done about it? Those are too many questions, and we're not going to get to it. But Heather, can you answer that?
I don't think science changed in the last 5 years. I think much more of the public has seen what big S science has become. But it's been obvious to those of us inside of it for as long as many decades that it has become about the money, not about hypothesis. It has become possible to say data-driven with a straight face, as if the numbers that you've generated somehow hold truth when you didn't start with a question and pattern seeking, which means it wasn't science you were doing in the first place. P-hacking and the replication crisis and all sorts of other phrases that everyone will have heard of is not news, actually, within science. Over in sort of field sciences territory, which is more of where Bret and I have spent time, has generally been not much money at all, and so the science has remained better, except for the one place in field science where there is a lot of money, that's climate change. And so, where is the worst science being done over in field science? It's the place where the big money is. So that then.
And yet Bill Gates, 2 days ago said, it turns out we were wrong about climate change.
But you read his memo, and he doesn't actually renege. He's just actually privileging still his favorite projects of vaccinating the world and messing with everyone's food. But he also still thinks it's about
somebody say that he found out that there's more money in AI than worrying about climate change.
Ew.
Yeah, why, as Bret said, why we listen to that man on anything, I'm not sure. Yeah. Unless maybe it's Microsoft, maybe. But so I think the only thing really that changed about science with a big S in the last 5 years, is that more people can see it now.
We can see it now. Yeah. Whereas it was corrupt before. It was
corruption, but also it just had become something that was difficult to do in a university setting. Yeah. Because at least in the U.S., grants, the overhead associated with grants runs universities. Therefore, university administrators privilege scientists who bring in big grants. Therefore, science that doesn't take a lot of money doesn't get those people don't get hired,
Yeah.
and so that science doesn't get done. And so the more and more science that is done is science that takes money and machines, and you get people, gene jockeys and recipe followers rather than creative, hypothesis-driven, interesting, curious, exploratory, interested in discovery scientists. And who does that also leave in running the governance structures of universities? Well, you don't want to spend the time of your grant-getting scientists doing governance, so we're going to let all the other people do it. And who is that? That's the grievance studies folks. So the people running the universities now are the people who are postmodernists who don't know how to think. And the people who are standing in for all of science are big-ass scientists who mostly just follow recipes, leaving those of us who are actually interested in discovering what's true in the world kind of scratching our heads going like, what happened?
Yeah.
I thought we were interested in being creative and curious and exploratory, and there don't seem to be jobs for us anymore.
Yeah. Bret, do you have a comments on this?
Yeah, I as always, I don't know how to say this because, to just tell you the truth, it sounds completely preposterous. But the nature of science is that it is very powerful and it is extremely delicate. Okay? It has to be done according to the philosophical rules of science, which are the only thing that make it work. However, there is so much money to be made and so much power to be acquired in corrupting science that effectively the entire sensitive landscape that we in civilization are depending on to know what's true about the world we live in and what its implications for us might be, that entire system has been displaced by a parasite. Now, you can see this over in pharma land. If I say that most of the people who work at Pfizer are probably well-intentioned and think they are doing something positive, but the C-suite understands that that's not what it is, you'll sort of understand that because you've seen what they're willing to do to you. If you look at medicine and you look at the fact that the doctors know, they have to know because we had this mass vaccination campaign. We know the adverse event signal is through the roof. That means the doctors saw the consequence of what they recommended, and yet they are quiet. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that medicine, one of the few professions in which you actually have an oath. Have you read that oath? You should go back and read that oath. It's good. It's way more significant and interesting than first do no harm. That oath requires them to tell us what they know. It requires it, and they are not telling us. So we can say medicine, somewhere between its formation thousands of years ago and modernity, got displaced by a parasite. Do the doctors who are wearing the stethoscopes think of themselves as part of a parasite? No. Do they understand that they are imposters? No, they don't. They have some story they tell themselves, but it's been entirely displaced. So my point to you is the truth about science is the same as the truth about medicine. And it is that the thing you're looking at that is supposed to understand what the hell is going on is a fraud that doesn't largely understand it is a fraud. And the right thing to do is to take what it tells you with a grain of salt. Figure out who benefits from my coming to believe this thing that I'm being assured is a scientific conclusion, and that will very frequently tell you whether or not there's any reality to it at all.
There was something like more than 100,000 papers that were generated during the COVID period on the subject, and I became pretty good at spotting errors in them. I'm actually grateful for this period in a way.
That's what I'd like to add too.
Yeah, I mean, it's helped me understand. I can now spot things pretty quickly. I mean, I was also given a lot of tutorials by Harvey Risch, who has like an eagle eye for fake science.
Yeah.
but it's a shock, and I've still seen the problems. I mean, and typically the shoddier the science, the more likely it is going to appear above the fold in the New York Times, right?
There does seem to be a correlation.
Like this paper that came out in Nature the other day that said that correlated beef consumption with contributing to climate change by zip code. So you could hate your neighbors if they're eating a hamburger or whatever. Like, stop changing the climate, with your hamburger. Whatever. It was amplified by the Washington Post with a tool that you could type in your zip code.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I mean, this is just absurd. All right, Jessica, you get the last word.
Positive note. To answer your question, science didn't change. Science is immutable. It's hypothesis generation, experimentation, reproduction. I changed big time. I think a lot of us did. A lot of us like flipped 180, right? Like I had no problem with vaccines like 5 years ago, and now I'm like never getting one again. So the silver lining in all of this is this, first of all, like I never would have met all you guys or been able to propel myself in the way that I have in the science realm with the scientific method. If this didn't happen, I might be stuck in someone else's lab doing, this for the rest of my life. I mean, so, yeah, I think another thing I'd like to say is that one of the things I think we all have in common is that we just kept doing what we always did. We were the ones that didn't stray from the course of how we've always done things, which usually, involves being, ethical and having a sense of morality. So like, I don't know if that made any sense, but I think that we all changed. I don't think science could change, period. It is what it is. And the stuff that they're presenting is not science. It's propaganda, in my opinion. It's just, it's a diktat. It's a narrative. Most of what they say is not true. Ugh.
Martin Kulldorff, when we started Brownstone, he said that we are leaving, one of the reasons for Brownstone is that we are leaving the age of the Enlightenment and entering into a new dark ages, based in part on what he saw as happening in the world of science and just the sheer fakery that was dominating all kinds of traditional concerns over.
But that's the parasitic infiltration.
Yeah.
It's not science.
And
Yes.
I must say, we are not entering a dark age. We are in a dark age. The question is, how far back does it go, right? It's a cryptic dark age. But if you think about it, this is just about the way the mind works, right? We think of, the Depression as if it was sepia-toned. It wasn't. I promise you, it was in full color.
If it was what?
Sepia-toned.
Yeah.
All the photographs from the Works Progress Administration have this yellow tint because that's the way photography looked at the time. So anyway, we think of the dark age based on the way it is represented
technology,
in books.
Yeah.
But this is one. This is what a dark age looks like. Your scientists are speaking nonsense, and you have to realize that the science, Jessica's right, you just keep doing the science, but what happens to you if you do that is you end up outside of the system. The system won't tolerate it. It becomes allergic to you.
Fine with me.
And it kicks you out. And so the point is, where's the science? Well, it's not in the science departments, right? It's everywhere but there. That's the last place you're going to find it.
All right. Well, thank you, Bret. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather. That was a wonderful panel. Thank you. We'll be back. I think we have a break right now. I don't know why, but we have a break right now, right? Yeah, and we're going to be back at 3:20, I guess. Am I getting this right? 3:10. No, it says 3:20 for mental health. Okay. All right, we ready to go? Why did we have a break just now? We didn't need a break. This works. It's okay. Oh, wow. All right. Let's have a seat and get going on our next panel. We got a big panel. Where's everybody? Where are my friends? Laura, Cooper, Kim, Josef, come on up. You're all mic'd. Come on up, Laura. Okay. Oh, just choose a spot. All right, I'm going to wear the cape for this one. Where's Josef? This is a big panel. A big panel, only 40 minutes. Okay, we're going to do mental health now. Josef?
I think
Whatever. I'll take this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that the Brownstone tie?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, wow. Looks so handsome.
Yes, second bow tie I've ever tied in my life.
Wow.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
So good. I thought you were going to wear your hoodie.
Yeah.
It's good. Somebody said, well, I'm glad to be here, but my daughter says I'm joining a cult.
I guess I'm a part of it now. I've got the bow tie.
Yeah.
I need a brownstone cape next.
Cult because of the bow ties. All right, we're going to do mental health now. And now, how many in the room have read Unshrunk by Laura Delano? Yeah. Oh.
Ooh, Laura.
Okay. Yeah, really, it's a special book. Have you sold the motion picture rights yet?
Not yet.
All right, so this issue is a very interesting one because, our worlds just keep expanding and broadening. I guess I didn't really have much reason to care one way or the other about pharmaceuticals, and then suddenly you realize, the entire population is being poisoned. Okay, that's very interesting. And then at some point in this process, we got to know Laura and Cooper, and they've had an organization for a number of years, the Inner Compass Initiative, with the sole focus on examining these psych drugs, their effects, and helping people taper off them to go back and embrace real life. And so in so many ways, ICI works well with Brownstone, and we've been focusing more on this. We've been publishing more and more on this topic. Well, maybe, Laura, you're the right one to give the general overview before we plunge right in. Go ahead.
An overview
of the problem and where we are.
So here we are in 2025 in the midst of what we often hear as a mental health crisis, and I'm sure you've all seen it in your own families, communities. The rates of people, especially young people, who are struggling are higher than ever. It seems like everyone is plagued with some kind of angst, despair, paranoid challenge. Just it's ubiquitous almost, this emotional and mental suffering that's all around us. And so, you hear public health authorities say we have this crisis, this mental health crisis, and what most people conclude is people must not be getting the treatment they need, and that's why we're here. People don't have enough access to care, they're not having access to therapy, they're not having access to medicines, and that must be why we're where we are. But when you actually look at the numbers of people engaged with some kind of mental health treatment, whether it's therapy or pharmaceutical drugs, the numbers are higher than they've ever been. We have, by my calculation, around 65 million Americans, and I think that's a conservative estimate. Those are 2022 CDC numbers, currently on some kind of psychiatric drug. and most of these people are on these drugs not for weeks or months, but for years. And many of them are on multiple of these drugs at one time. And if you actually look at the evidence base for these drugs, you find that runs very counter to how these drugs are being used in our society. The trials that these drugs are approved on are generally very short term, literally a matter of weeks, 6 to 8 weeks on average, and they've never been studied in combination with each other. And so, but I think most people don't realize this. And so I think for all of us up here, you know, the work we're engaged in our varying roles is all rooted in this recognition that clearly this massive industry of mental health that is making billions and billions of dollars off of our suffering is in the very least not helping, and perhaps is actually fueling the suffering itself, and what Ivan Illich, you know, calls in his beautiful way this medical nemesis of mental health care, where this very system that claims to be about solving this problem is actually further reinforcing and worsening the problem itself.
When was the book Medical Nemesis written?
I don't know. I think it was sometime in the 70s. I can't remember which year.
Yeah, and the author is
Ivan Illich.
Ivan Illich. And I read, I think, one of his books. Maybe that was the book I read. And it's like it contains all truth or something. It's wonderful. Everybody should read it. It's still available, right?
Oh yeah, and he wrote about all various arenas of life beyond medicine. To me, he's my intellectual spirit animal, and I think he's the intellectual spirit animal of our cultural moment.
Yeah.
And I hope he comes more into the light.
Yeah, right. It's a good book to review. I said earlier I was going to introduce all the panelists. So that you just met Laura Delano, and then to her left is Cooper Davis, who's the executive director of ICI, a good friend of Brownstone. And then Josef Witt-Doerring. Is that how you said? Yes.
Not at all. Yeah, but yeah.
That's not how you said?
Josef Witt-Doerring.
Oh, I have to say Witt-Doerring?
Yeah, we just do it in like the American way, not like the German way. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how come we say Witt-Doerring, but then you insist we say Josef?
I know, it's really confusing. I say Josef because my dad always calls me Josef.
I mean, if we're going to be Americans, we would call you Joseph.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So, well, anyway,
Totally rational.
You get to dictate how we say it.
Yeah.
Okay, Josef.
Yeah.
Witt-Doerring.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also Ken Witczak, who spoke at our supper club. Actually, you were an amazing star at the supper club last week. Right? So you were fantastic. And you serve on the consumer advisory panel for the FDA as a result of your lifetime, not lifetime, but a long time of activism warning about the safety of pharmaceuticals in general, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cooper, did you want to add anything to Laura's framing?
No, not really. I think it was perfect.
Okay.
I mean, what I will say is I think, you know, the composition of this panel, I think it's interesting. Josef himself, he's a psychiatrist.
Yeah, I didn't even point that out. I was so obsessed with your name, I didn't put it. You're a practicing psychoanalyst.
Yeah, so I'm this.
No.
I'm like the psychiatrist. We just like throw the drugs at people. We don't talk to them like the analysts used to. Very, very different. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, the thing that's, I guess, unique about me is I came to being a major critic of psychiatry through the traditional system, 10 years practicing as a psychiatrist. I spent some time in the pharmaceutical industry and then at the FDA, realized I was participating in, I think, the biggest fraud in medicine. And I don't say that lightly. I really think it is. I mean, the number of meds we're using, the fact that the suicide rate's up in adults, kids, all that kind of stuff. We're completely ignoring the real reasons for the mental health crisis.
Yeah.
So I ended up leaving the system, and I de-prescribe full-time now. So we have a clinic that's kind of all over the country now, and we've helped hundreds of people come off psychiatric medications.
That's not very profitable, is it?
Well, in some ways it is, because it's a very limited service, and people can't find help in that. You'd think it would be something that's not profitable because, you know, you treat your patients and then they kind of disappear. But it is very time intensive, and it's a really scarce commodity, to be honest. And so we end up making a lot of this information free to go out worldwide now because no one can really find help for this.
Yeah. Now, how did you discover ICI? You were doing this before you met Laura and
Hardly, to be honest. I met Laura back in 2017 at a conference, and I was like a junior baby doctor at the time, had no idea what I was doing, and I guess her and her colleagues kind of, helped point me in the right direction, and I kind of just sat in an incubator for 5 or 6 years, and then I popped up again, when I left the pharmaceutical industry, like ready to go and be very vocal about all of the issues.
And you've been I saw you on Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, on Tucker, and we've just been doing national media. We were just at the Daily Wire, Dr. Drew, kind of all of these different places. And so this is really gaining some serious traction now.
Yeah. And I think it's probably also worth, what you have up here. Kim has been doing this work for a very long time. And the pool of people, this work defined somewhat broadly, it's still not a ton of people.
No,
right?
I was going to say it's very few. I like to call myself the accidental advocate. I got thrown into this work, and I've been doing it now since 2003. So I'm on 22 years of doing drug safety advocacy. And it started out personal, that's why I say accidental. My husband was given an antidepressant for insomnia by his GP with no history of depression. 5 weeks later, he took his life. And that literally, when your life falls apart, you start going into investigative mode. And that night that my husband was found, I happened to be out of the country the first 3 weeks he was on the drug. So I wasn't even there the first 3 weeks. I come home, he's telling me his head's outside his body. Call the doctor says give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. And it's my busy time of the season, and my dad was the one that found him, called me when I was out of town. That night, the coroner asked one simple question: was he on any medication? And the only thing Woody was taking was Zoloft. And she said, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death. And literally that same night, also, the front page of our newspaper had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. So when my life fell apart, and you're like, he wasn't depressed, he had no history, none of that, you literally, it's kind of like so when you said earlier about the vaccines and all that and all these injuries, when something like that happens, you just start leaving no stone unturned. But we Googled Zoloft and suicide, had no idea that in 1991, the FDA had hearings on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. Almost every one of those members on the committee took money from pharmaceutical, and they said, nope, we don't see anything. Fast forward now, it's 2003. Now we have Zoloft on the market, we have Paxil on the market, and we have kids that are getting it. So that became really my mission, is to help push to get black box warnings, because I was shocked. I'm like, there were no warnings. So in 2004 and 2006, we helped to get the black box warnings. And let me tell you, there were hundreds of families that came forward during that time. And then I also had a failure to warn wrongful death lawsuit against Pfizer. And you got all these documents out from under seal that showed that this has been going on for a long time. So the fact that it's now, and I'm for the first time feel really hopeful, because I feel like, that's when, I knew of Laura's work, and then, I've obviously gotten to know you now. But there has been very few people in the harm space, and yet what happens with, especially these drugs, you go in with a side effect, like what Woody's saying, his head's outside his body. Well, you could do that now, and now you get another drug on, and another drug, and another drug. So anyways, it is a really important issue, and I'm just going to make one then final full circle. I ended up sitting on the FDA Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Committee as a consumer rep for the last 9 years, the same committee that in 91 was not the voice for the public. And so that I could be the voice for the public, and let me tell you, see how the FDA works and the drug companies, and then also my background's advertising and marketing. So I'm like, oh, this is just a business. This is like, you got to have the FDA to
The
put the drug
FDA
on
is
the
a
market.
business.
Yeah, it's a business.
Yeah.
It's a hurdle.
Yeah.
It's a hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing worth saying to this crowd also, you know, the work that you've been doing for so long, and then keep in mind, you know, many people have read Laura's book. So at the time in 2003, you were how old?
20.
20, right? So
I've
you
been
can kind
on
of see how
6
these stories like, you know, interlace. But here we are at this moment where things really are coming to a head because it's taken that much time to sort of get people like him
Well,
in these
let me
positions.
ask you, so Zoloft is still on the market though, right? It's not like,
Oh, yeah.
There's more than
Generic.
ever on the market.
okay, it's generic, okay. And it does have a black box warning.
Yep.
But only up until, what, age 25? Is
Age
it?
24, and so that's one of the things, I mean, it's interesting, if you actually look at the documents that came out, which we're going to, the FDA back in 1991 in a memo, when it had to do with sertraline, which is Zoloft's efficacy, they knew it was during the AIDS crisis where the FDA was getting too much pressure from the outside saying they weren't approving drugs fast enough.
Yeah.
And so they said, we're going to come under attack, and this is the last line of this 3-page memo. We're going to come under attack from years down the road for not being as demanding as we ought to be for establishing the efficacy of antidepressant products.
Yeah.
That was 91. And so I'm like, all these years later that we're still sitting here, but I think it had to have, you know, the amounts of people that
Yeah.
are taking it, and now you can't ignore
Well,
it.
let me ask this, do these black box warnings diminish the consumer, the uptake of the drug? Do they make a difference in demand?
I mean, what I see just as a clinician and the way we were trained to look at it was, you know, this is just controversial. You know, the science isn't settled. You know, the FDA, they kind of just, they've put it on there to kind of, you know, appease some people who are unhappy, but really it's not real. And so this ends up just being cover from the pharmaceutical industry when there's like you know, an issue like this, the PR machine kind of kicks into place and they're like, oh yeah, the FDA put this warning on the labels, but you know, this professor from Harvard thinks it's kind of overblown. He thinks it's dangerous and we really shouldn't talk about it too much because, gosh, we're going to scare people away from these life-saving drugs and you're a dangerous person.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think is really frightening about the boxed warning is it was based on the number of suicide attempts that happened in groups that got the drug versus not the drug. And what they find in people under age 25 is you're more likely to have a suicide attempt if you get the drug than if you were given placebo. And then you have to think, well, why are 5% of our kids on drugs that make them more suicidal than the placebo? And so that makes no sense at all.
Well, it makes as much sense as distributing a flu vaccine that makes you more likely to get the flu.
But here, this is, I think, of really going back to the very beginning, talking about Ivan Illich for a second.
Yeah.
So, and this sort of moment, you know, Kennedy's at HHS, and you have a lot more interest, more widespread interest in all of these issues. But I think one of the concerns is, as much as this is a drug safety issue, the number of people who are on drugs in the first place needs attention. I've spoken to a lot of people over the last year who, you know, superficially are very much aligned with our work and our mission, in that they are concerned about the number of people taking these SSRIs, right? But a lot of those people, it doesn't bother them that 65 million Americans, or 1 out of 10 kids, is on a psych drug. They just want them on different drugs, right?
Or different products. Like
Different
medical
products,
device.
medical devices.
Psychedelics, TMS.
Yes, all this kind of thing. So I think the concern is in this sort of like maha moment. I've met a lot of people in Washington, D.C. over the last year who are like, oh, you're interested in mental health policy? Me too.
Yeah.
And then I find really what they mean by mental health policy is that they want to reschedule MDMA.
Yeah.
Right? That's not mental health policy. That's something else.
I
Right.
find that strange.
And I think that's a viable and important conversation. There are other treatments and other modalities and other possibilities that we certainly should explore, but we have to, nobody can really make money off the work that needs to be done. which
is
to unwind this system that is perpetrating these harms that collectively create this thing we're calling the mental health crisis.
Yeah. And I feel
that's
like
not solved.
I was going to say, I almost feel like you have to go upstream in a way. Like, what if, like, I mean, it's pain and suffering and just like looking at humanity. Like, what if that's actually something that we need to go through? As, you know, instead of like drugging it, because at the end of the day, like, these aren't mind erasers, or like, it's not going to bring, like, even after my husband died, the doctor said, do you want something? And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I think this is what killed him. It's what killed him. But I go, more importantly, like, aren't I supposed to hurt? Like, he died, and she literally said, but you don't need to. And I thought, that was a doctor. And so if that is kind of the prevailing kind of, like, I think we need to look,
it's
go
a war
bigger,
on human life and emotion. I want to get back to that in a second, but just quickly, tell me if I'm wrong. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I think I saw an ad for a psych drug that advertised various side effects, including dizziness, disorientation, bowel trouble, and death. They actually say that on TV. Death?
And
you advertise that drugs is going to that could kill me?
Side effects is a marketing term, by the way, but go on. Laura, you should.
Well, I was going to take further what you're all saying here, which is that at the heart of this, we're in a crisis of medicalization. And for anyone not familiar with that term, it's taking ordinary human experiences and turning them into medical problems that need to therefore be solved by medical treatments. And I think the power of the mental health industry and of other health industries beyond that too is really, I think, fueled by this really indoctrination as a society that we are all, so many of us have been sucked into, where we come to see whether it's physical pain or emotional pain as symptoms to treat, as problems to fix, as Kim's saying, as you were saying, Kim, you know, as opposed to signals about your life, about the food you're eating, about your relationships, about the environment that you're in. And I think the reason the mental health industry has come to take on this monolithic status is, at its heart, medicalization. And I think the other two pieces here that I think are fueling this crisis that we're in are the fact that these drugs, because they're only studied in the short term, and we are all basically guinea pigs in this long-term psychiatric polypharmacy experiment, these drugs actually worsen the very, you know, the mental and emotional challenges that people have, especially when used in the long term. But because these drug effects, these adverse drug effects, actually look like the symptoms of the illnesses that they're purported to treat, people don't recognize that. They don't recognize iatrogenic injury caused by these drugs because they are trained to see people getting worse as people getting sicker and therefore needing more treatment. And then I think the other piece that's so big here is this issue of withdrawal, the fact that all of these drugs, all classes of psychiatric drugs, can cause you to become physically dependent if you take them for long enough, such that when you try to stop, if you don't taper properly, and our nonprofit provides a lot of free information about how to do that, you may well experience an unspeakably agonizing aftermath of coming off these meds that everyone around you then tells you is a relapse of your illness, therefore the reason why you need to go back on them. And then when you go back on them and you feel better, you think, oh, these medications are helping me. It's actually because you're not in withdrawal anymore. And so until such time comes as we address this medicalization issue, the fact that these drugs cause all these adverse effects that people aren't recognizing as such, and the fact that these drugs cause withdrawal that is being misunderstood as people's worsening illnesses, those foundations need to be fixed before we then try to find new, better solutions, which I think oftentimes is just not engaging with the mental health industry anymore. That itself alone might actually help a lot of people feel better.
Well, you know, one of the beautiful things about your book is the way it ends with this sort of embrace of the pain and difficulty of life. And I've heard you in interviews, Laura, say this, that life is hard. You know, being a mom is hard. Having a job is hard. Everything, life's hard. And we have to recognize that and learn to deal with that through ways that are non-medical. That are spiritual.
We've entered this this kind of Aldous Huxley Brave New World type situation right now, where it's, just like they use Soma in the book to kind of numb out people who are unhappy with the system.
Yeah.
It's what we're actually doing now, because aside from life being hard, there's a lot of social things going on now, which we never used to suffer from before.
Yeah.
We have kids on social media for 3.5 hours who used to spend that time hanging out with their friends, exercising, sleeping.
Yeah.
We live in a corporate world where people move every 5 to 7 years, which totally fractures their communities. They're not with their parents and their friends. We're eating shit food as well. And I think it's like 70% of American families, both the parents work. And so you're totally stressed out. We've got financial problems and all of that.
Yeah.
And isn't it so convenient to fall back on, hey, nothing happening politically, nothing happening societally, wealth inequality, none of these things are an issue. It's the chemical imbalance and it's in your brain. But don't worry, we have the cure for that.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. So I look back, so I've been working on this, you were saying medicalization, like this idea of selling sickness, disease mongering, cradle to grave. It's a business model. Yeah. And so there was a article, it was the CEO of the Merck in 1970 who, with Fortune magazine, said, we can only sell to sick people, so we need to sell, I want to be like Wrigley's gum and sell to all people, healthy people. And so I think this started a long time ago, and so regardless of all of the, then you've got all the social issues that you're bringing in now, and people moving and people and just being human. But then the business just took advantage of it, right?
The social media addiction is a major.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great similarity between what's happening in psychiatry and with what Walter talked about before. He kind of goes, imagine there was this room and there were all these like PR people and they're sitting around and they go, how could we kind of construct something that would be advantageous? I mean, what is the chemical imbalance, right? I mean, that was the narrative. Back in the 50s, they saw that if you gave a certain drug to people with tuberculosis, they became energized. And they said, well, maybe we'll give it to some people with depression. And lo and behold, they perk up. Now, there's two different narratives that you can pull from this. One of them is, well, we just put them on a drug and it kind of energized them and, it sort of masked their symptoms and they're looking a bit better. That makes a lot of sense. But that's not a great commercial narrative. A much better narrative is, well, these people were lacking serotonin. We know this drug kind of boosts serotonin a little bit. So let's go with that one because, people don't like the idea of masking their problems with drugs. Everyone's grandma would be like, we don't just sweep our problems under the rug with drugs. They're going to fester. They're not going to get better. But if you say, take this drug, it's like, a type 1 diabetic that doesn't make insulin. And it's just like giving them, it's giving them insulin and you'd never deprive them of that. All of a sudden they're like, well, this is, maybe this is true and maybe it reduces stigma for these men with stiff upper lips who don't want to go and see their doctors because it will give them cover that they're not failing in their lives. But it's essentially just a lie. It's a lie to get people to be more comfortable to take drugs that change their mood and personalities.
Great marketing ploy.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe you're uncomfortable with this topic, but it only occurred to me in the last 3 years at some point that the transgender issue is wrapped up also with pharmaceutical power.
Yeah.
Well, what I can say, having taken multiple psychiatric drugs through my teens and 20s, is that I lived in a very disembodied, disconnected way through that time without realizing that disembodiment and disconnection was drug induced, and to feel like I was in a body that I didn't feel integrated in, that I didn't feel in my skin. I didn't feel here. I won't speak to I won't make sweeping assumptions about anything, but I could see how that kind of disembodiment, drug-induced disembodiment, could lead people down paths where they seek solutions.
And also, I mean, the solution of changing your gender is necessarily going to require a tremendous infusion of additional drugs.
Well, and I think there's actually a big piece that's going to be coming out in a few weeks in a I won't say which, but in a major sort of mainstream, fairly left-leaning outlet, covering I don't know that it'll name trans specifically, but that's what everyone's going to read between the lines. And basically the story is, when you put a young teenager on an SSRI, one of the most established, if we were going to call SSRIs, refer to them by what they actually are most likely to do for someone, we wouldn't call them antidepressants, right? We would call them anti-sex, anti-libido drugs, right? They're actually prescribed for premature ejaculation. They are known to diminish libido, okay? This isn't controversial. So that effect, when it has that effect on somebody who's in the process of developing for the very first time a sense of themselves as sexual beings, a young teenager, okay, even if that effect is temporary, you know, and once you're off the drug, you no longer have that effect happening. Well, but during that window of development, if you did not have contact with sort of your libidinous self, and come to know yourself in that way through like a normal maturation process that has a social context, that has all these different sort of complicated contexts that don't show up in clinical trials, certainly, that you can't go back in time to that period of puberty and recapture that. So even if you're on for 6 months for some reason, you know, 14-year-old girl's on this for 6 months, and she misses out on what it would have felt like internally and sort of that personality formation process. Yep. Now she's older, she's not on the SSRI anymore, but she just feels something about herself that she feels different from her girlfriends. You know, I don't necessarily feel that way towards boys. Maybe I'm gay, or I don't actually feel that way towards women either. Maybe I'm in the wrong body. Maybe I'm a furry. Maybe I'm whatever. Right? And I think then we have these different cultural narratives that are ready to sort of step in and explain, no, you don't feel that. You don't feel normal because you are a different kind of normal. Maybe you're asexual, which is, you know, now a sexual orientation is, you know, to have none. So we come up with all these complicated frameworks to explain something that is actually quite obvious and sitting right in front of us.
Drug injury.
Drug injury. Yeah. It's drug injury, and because, thanks, and because this is one of the things that's, I think, unique to this psychiatric practice. When you are running these clinical trials, you necessarily have to cleave off all this critical context, right, in order to isolate variables and actually study this one particular aspect of it. But this is so context dependent. All of this is so subjective. Mood, you know, depression rating scales. I mean, these are just completely arbitrary, these things. And so it's really, really difficult to sort of nail anything down here. And then because of that, you can then say, oh, well, there's no evidence that SSRIs, you know, lead people towards asexuality or trans identification. There's no evidence.
Some crazy things. I mean, we were just at the FDA with Adam Urado, who's a Harvard-trained OBGYN who looks at this. And did you know that between, I think it's either 3% or 9% of women are on antidepressants when they're pregnant right now. And so that's a lot. And when you look at, because you can't do like a placebo-controlled trial with pregnant women, you do it with rats, right? And so what happens when you give rats who are pregnant these medications, and you can do that placebo control, the rodents who are exposed in utero, they grow up with a higher rate of autistic-like behaviors and decreased interest in sexual activity. And this is, you know, they're not on drugs as they develop. I mean, they were exposed in utero. So all of these drugs freely cross the placenta, and at the most pivotal time when the brain goes from being a speck to a fully formed brain, yes, you know, it's going to have effects. And so we may be seeing some of that come through now. You know, with all of these, asexuality and these gender identity issues, they're all coming up now, and, the drugs came out about 30 years ago. But then also kind of in the broader framework, surely, there's a piece of social contagion there. We became a country that really wanted to celebrate people who were, minorities, sexual minorities, all of these things. It became this kind of way to identify this cool feather in your hat where you could say, oh, look at me, I'm so oppressed. We moved away from, more traditional ways of having an identity, based on, your wisdom or what you did or your courage or all of these things. And it got kind of twisted in this weird way. I think it's dying down now. But, the transgender issue, there's a lot of interesting things going on there.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. I do think it's interesting that we began to hear so much about this and so many other things during the lockdown period, when we just denied kids access to their peers. And nowadays you get marketing for psych drugs everywhere you go, right? I mean, you just go for your general practitioner or whatever they're called, and you're going to take a test on, have you been sad recently? Yeah, I've been kind of sad recently. Let's dig into that a little bit. And next thing you know, you got a prescription, right?
Well, and I love that sheet, the PHQ-9 form, that was created by Pfizer.
Yeah.
Copyright.
And
Pfizer.
so that form that you go to your doctor, have you felt sad? And it's at every, doctor's office.
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. And then I remember it says generous donation by Pfizer Inc. And it's if you actually look at the bottom, and then it's 3 doctors, and I'm like, well, do you know anything about those? I remember bringing it up to my clinic. Those are key opinion leaders that have been paid by the pharmaceutical industry. And then I remember identifying this to my physician at a huge health clinic up in Minnesota. She went and reported it to the administration. And the next thing, they cut off the bottom so you couldn't see that it said the generous donation by Pfizer Inc. But if you look at that, you're like, well, of course, this is just a funnel, sales funnel.
Yeah.
You just put them in. And I feel like,
Like
you
a lead magnet, right?
Yeah, it's a lead magnet. It's what you do. Like, okay, once you get them up here, get them in the funnel, which is, then once you have them, then you start putting them on the drugs. And it's, again, I'm probably a little bit cynical because I came from the marketing background, advertising. So I see all of this as marketing. I saw the COVID vaccine stuff as marketing. And I also think it's been the perfect cover-up. So harms, like you think about the mental health space, if somebody's been harmed or you go in with a side effect, you're like, oh, well, that's the disease. Or like the virus, the COVID virus, or if you got vaccine injury, you'd be like, well, that's the virus that's causing it, not the vaccine. So I feel like a lot of it's been kind of cover up and marketing and.
Well, the other thing, the other group that's complicit in this, because we can be like, big bad pharmaceutical industry, how dare they? I mean, clearly there's a whole army of doctors who are into this as well, right?
Yep.
And then we have, we have to look at the structure of medicine and how we deliver care. And, we have a payer-based system where you are incentivized to see more patients. I mean, you make more money if you see 4 patients in an hour than if you see 1 patient in an hour and, engage with, I guess, the more challenging work of understanding the person in front of you, motivating them to change their lives and their lifestyle and things like that. If you have this incentive to see them quickly, give them the PHQ-9, even better, they do it before they even walk in the room. They do it in the waiting room.
Online.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do it online. And then instead of having to motivate them or, listen to them complain about their relationship or their work problems or their existential crisis, don't worry, I've got this tablet here, it works for the chemical imbalance, safe and effective, approved by the FDA. See you later. It's a really nice, sterile encounter that, doesn't get too emotional.
Yeah. But you not just do it online, do it in school. And Brownstone has published on this, right? The PHQ-9 for anybody. This is a screening tool, which is basically a questionnaire that is meant to, you have like 35 questions or something like that. There's a short version and a long version, and it's for the patient, or in the case of a younger person, maybe a teacher or a parent can fill it out on their behalf. It's like, you feeling more frustrated this week than you were last week? You know, are you sometimes disappointed? Yes. Sometimes, you know, always, sometimes, never. This is right. And so you add it all up, and you get. And if you're like at 29 or above, then follow up, right? And so. A few months ago, it was announced that universal mental health screenings for every child in the public school system in the state of Illinois. Pritzker does his press conference. Everybody's like, this is great, getting young people the important, life-saving treatment that they deserve. Yeah. Right? This is how it's framed. Nobody in the room, nobody in the press covering this for a second has any doubt that this is an unalloyed good. Yeah. Right? There's no drawback here. This is only clapping. Yeah. Only clapping for this.
If you complain about it, it's like, why are you so against mental health screening? Isn't more screening better? Don't you want to catch the kids earlier? Yeah. But then it's like, are you out of your mind? The whole mental health care system is so dysfunctional. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to walk in there, they're going to do the PHQ-9, and they're going to get the drug. You know. Yeah.
And I think what this, to me, what this arises out of is this. Over the past 10 to 15 years, I've seen this dramatic change where what used to be a left-wing analysis of the mental health industry, where you're critiquing pharma, you're critiquing the exploitation of people who are in difficult situations. Something flipped, and what happened was the medical treatment became conflated with care. With this benevolent, we want to take care of our fellow citizens. We want to raise struggling people up. We want to meet people who are in times of need and help them. That impulse, that heartfelt impulse, was exploited and conflated with medical treatment, to the point where now, when I tell my story of being harmed by psychiatric drugs, and I'm literally just sharing my own story, I'm not even getting into the research and the data and all that, I'm just sharing my story. I see people, I can see the cogs churning, and they look at me and say, so you don't think people should get help? And
you must have voted for Trump.
And I think this is so, at the end of the day, it's up to us as citizens, it's up to us as parents, us as friends, community members, to take back, first of all, to take back suffering from medicalization, to reclaim it as this essential part of being alive in a very difficult world, but also to take back the right and the ability to take care of each other, and that from professionalization, and this idea that care can only come as a service that you pay for from someone with licenses and degrees after their name. We have to take it back as neighbors, parents, friends. To me, once we take that back, this is the biggest threat to the mental health industry, is when people realize that within each of us, we have the ability to help ourselves and each other, free from the exchange of services. And I think once we do that, then this industry is hooped. And I think really, too, at the heart of this is a spiritual crisis, a crisis of meaning. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be here? And medicalization distorts any other capacity to make meaning of suffering in any other way. And I believe that it's our pain that is the catalyst for change. If we want to change this world we live in, we have to feel our grief and our angst and our anger, and we have to use that as fuel, not take it to a doctor to treat. And the more that we can do that together, the more the demand for this monolithic industry will just lessen over time, because I'm cynical about it ever doing anything different. Like Cooper said, they're just going to change the quick fix model to some other new technology. It's up to us as citizens to take back this power. And the beautiful thing is we can do it right now. We can do it at any moment.
Thank you, Laura. Cooper. Josef. Kim. Thank you.
Thanks. Great. Nice job, man.
We got one other panel, Aaron and Tom and Kim, or Joe. Yes.
I have a comment for everybody. How many of you know about Tom Insel?
Oh,
Yeah?
Everybody up here.
Yeah.
Let me tell his story. Tom Insel was the head of National Institutes of Mental Health. He was at a conference much like this. At the end of his speech, there was a question from the audience. like I had. It said, Tom, you don't get it. Tom Insel had the consciousness to say, what don't I get? The guy said, you're telling us about the chemistry on the paint when the house is on fire. You need to do something else. Yeah. What Tom did is he went to Google, he learned AI, he learned how to build a chat group. He built chat groups for people with mental health, 12 to 15 members, more groups. Those groups provide a sense of coherence, a sense of control, a sense of understanding, and a sense of meaning. That's what Antonovsky said makes people healthy. We need to make people healthy, and that's the way to do it. Control, meaning, understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Right, Tom Harrington, Aaron Curiotti, Jill Malone for our final panel for the day. I tell you what, I am so excited to see Jay tomorrow. It's thrilling that he's coming. You didn't get my cup?
No.
Oh, okay. And Tom Harrington, is he mic'd? Where's Tom? Oh, there he is. Are you mic'd up, Tom? No? Okay. Our panel on academia with all people who have left academia.
Where should I sit?
Oh, just make it up. I might. Oh, I know, it's incredible. Yeah, I might let you moderate this since you're a senior counselor.
The best title.
How you do? Jill, you were in academia, weren't you, for a while?
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
2000 I left.
2000.
Yeah, I was at University of Davis and then the University of Maryland Medics.
I was a biologist.
Yes.
Okay. And you left to raise a family.
No, actually, I left. Robert and I started a consulting business together.
Okay.
And we both left academia.
Okay. Yeah. We got 3 refugees from academia
Yeah, I was
here.
going to say, I'm no longer recovering. I think I'm recovered.
Well.
Aaron, I think he's still recovering. I'm working on it.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just saying we have 3 refugees. Well, I don't know. Why don't you sit here? Okay. 3 refugees from academia. Jill Malone, who was at UC Davis, you said, in biology, and then left. You are a senior fellow now at Brownstone, and then Aaron Curiotti, who left UCLA? No, UC Riverside. Irvine. Because, well, let's just say it. I mean, you wouldn't take a shot, right? And that was basically it. I mean, that's the whole story. And
I sued them too. I challenged their vaccine mandate in federal court.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really efficient way to go sideways with your employer really quickly if you're interested in doing that.
Yeah.
Also a great way to lose money.
Yes, it's also good.
And then Tom Harrington, who is at, I think it's sometimes called a Little Ivy?
Yeah.
Yeah? A Little Ivy. We don't say the name, though, do we?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Trinity College.
Trinity College. And then they tried to force the product on you, and you said, look, that's too great a cost. It's bad enough dealing with the dean.
Very true.
So I'm not sure where we want to take this, but I will just start off by saying it strikes me that the dominant swaths of academia is in crisis right now, not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I'm not sure that we have a viable alternative in place.
Well, the alternative, I'm just going to jump in.
Go.
Because I have a way of doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, the alternative is, someone mentioned Ivan Illich in the last session. The idea is that one can educate oneself, right? There's the scene in Good Will Hunting where the guy who doesn't go to Harvard but is pretty bright takes down the guy who's going to Harvard. He's at the bar. He's trying to impress the girl. At the end of this takedown, he said, and you're just realizing that instead of paying all this tuition for this fancy education, you could have gotten a better education with, $1.98 in late fees at the local public library. And so the idea that one can educate oneself, I think, is an important thing for Americans to grasp. The idea that not everyone has to go to college or should go to college is another concept that we should grasp. 10 years ago, everyone was telling young people, you got to learn how to code because computers are the future, right? Well, now all the coders are being put out of business by AI. But I don't see the electricians and the plumbers and the contractors and the people with skilled labor being put out of business by AI. So we still need people to build things that are good at that and reliable and responsible.
So the other thing is we also need a liberal education.
We also need a liberal education. And so we have universities now, and we could talk about, well, they've been affected with the woke mind virus and they're ideological, and all of that is true, but there are systemic issues as well at work. When you have an institution whose endowment is so large that they don't have to be responsive to tuition-paying students or families, parents paying tuition at all.
This is weird.
It's very hard to reform an institution like that. I mean, imagine a business that doesn't have any incentive or any reason that it needs to be responsive to its customers, right? It's gonna go in all kinds of weird directions.
Yeah, I had this hope that the whole thing was going to collapse after they shut everything down and still charged tuition, but didn't let kids go to classes, and then otherwise locked them in the dorm rooms and made them mask up and all. I thought, oh, this system's going to collapse. But then you look at their finances, that doesn't matter.
No, the smaller colleges are going to.
Yes.
There's a lot of those that are going to struggle
Yeah.
in the current environment. A lot of people are going to realize, the value out of a college education. I can go and get a list of books every American should read and, spend my time in the military or trade school or doing any number of other things while at the same time educating myself for pennies. And
I don't think most people, so when you look at young men who aren't going to college but going into trades, they usually fall into something and then expand on it, become entrepreneurs, hopefully.
yeah.
These young men are listening to Jordan Peterson, they're listening to Rogan, they're getting educated through the podcast system, and it's really incredible the education they're getting. And we see it all the time in our farm where we have a lot of young people working, that these people they're really on top of things. It's kind of amazing. They're on, and they don't have any college education, but they're as educated as any college undergrad I've ever met. So there is this dynamic happening in society where things are changing rapidly. And I see this as really positive because I view one of the problems with college is what it promotes is the corporate model. It promotes people to break away from the nuclear family, move out of town, and boom, it's gone, okay? Then they can move anywhere for a job throughout their career. They just 5-7 years, they move. It's very unhealthy for society. It's great for corporations. It's not so good for families.
That's really interesting. Tom?
I agree and disagree with you, Jill. I think these young men who are educating themselves are very impressive. But they're doing so generally through oral learning.
That is true.
And we need to point out the fact that oral learning and textual learning are two different types of learning. Textual learning brings a precision, an analytical fineness to what you do that you can't get out of pure orality. There's a famous book by Walter Ong called Orality and Literacy, in which he talks about the relative strengths of each tradition. Orality brings you emotional warmth. He talks about the voice as a motive of bringing people together. And you sacrifice that, but you gain with literacy, you gain fineness in your cognitive approach.
Also, oral is transient.
Right, oral is transient. And if we're thinking about education as a bank where we talk about what is common to us as people, then we need to go back to the textual tradition. And I take a slightly different and more historical approach to this. I speak sometimes of the suicide of the university. I think we're at the end of a 500-year period, if you take Renaissance humanism as the beginning of the modern university, that we've come to the end of a 500-year cycle. And a lot of the suicide of the university has to do with the suicide of the humanities, which is the branch I come from. The humanities were the core of the university in its inception. Over the course of several centuries, they became supplanted by the scientific method. And in a certain sense, the ghost was let out of the machine. And the problem with the humanities is that we didn't fight back and say, wait a second, we're the set of pursuits that bring the idea of creating wholeness out of the fragmentation of life. The scientific method necessarily, through analysis as opposed to synthesis, brings us to fragmentation. And what happened with the humanities is that they refused to believe in their own mission and sought to become pseudoscientific in the course of the 19th century by creating pseudosciences like poli-sci, like the philology that dominate so many literature faculties. These are pseudoscientists that were
Social sciences, in many ways, trying to ape the physical
pitifully
sciences.
aping. And in fact, analysis is good on the granular level, but something needs to put things back together. And it connects with the idea of seeking wholeness and, frankly, a spiritual integrity that needs to be the ghost in the machine in order for the instrumentalist knowledge of science to make sense.
So I don't disagree with you, but so in the scientific method, in my opinion, is deeply flawed. And it's deeply flawed because you develop a hypothesis, then you test the hypothesis, then you become wedded to the hypothesis, and what you want to do is prove the hypothesis. Thomas Chamberlain in 1890 came up with the method of multiple working hypotheses. And that is where you sit down and you write down every single hypothesis that it could possibly be, and then you set out to prove and disprove all of them with the proper controls. And you end up with a very different way of doing science, which I think in terms of the humanities, particularly the social sciences, people become wedded to whatever the theory is, which often happens to be mimicking whatever is happening in society, whether it's war or feminism. You know, anthropology, you see the feminist apes, you know, when feminism is in that whole story. But I think the method of multiple working hypotheses, which was published in 1890 by Science, republished by Science in 1965, has a lot to offer. And in science education, we don't teach that. All we teach is this one scientific method, but there's other ways of doing science that I think are really important.
And even on that one scientific method, there's institutional structures in place that disincentivize daring hypotheses or really innovative work. So there's a lot of Me Too work, just like pharmaceutical companies are producing Me Too drugs right now, make it tweak it just enough.
Well, paradigm shifting. Anytime you step outside of the paradigm, you're going to get slaughtered in science.
That's right. So the scientists who have the biggest NIH grants, the R01 grants, sit on the committees that choose who else gets grant funding, and they become the gatekeepers. They also become the gatekeepers at the journals for the peer review process. And so the safest way to get grant funding at the university is just to keep going with the next tiny incremental thing that you've been doing your whole career.
That is not a rewarding life.
So Tom, how do you...
It also doesn't advance science very much.
How do you wed back the social sciences, anthropology,
economics,
economics, back to the spiritual without losing the rigor?
I don't think it's a contradiction necessarily, because when I talk about the spiritual, I'm talking about the ability to be humble before the object of your study. I think what has gone on with the creation of the linear idea of progress is that if I do more of the same analytical work, I'm necessarily getting someplace. And I think what we're finding is we're creating a lot more fragmented knowledge, and we're not leaving space for the process of bringing those knowledge pieces together. Let's go to the humanities in terms of a poem and what the incentives in a literature faculty are. Walter spoke beautifully this morning about narratives. Narratives being the way we actually learn about how life works. How can you pick apart a narrative in a way that's, you can go down to the fine level on the use of the lexicon and the use of allusions, but you ultimately need to bring it back together and hand it to the reader and say, what does this evoke in you? And let that person engage in the process of wonder and engagement with where this poem takes them. The academic pursuit of the humanities makes a mockery of that process. It says, publish a bunch of articles in which you look at the use of X symbolism in X poem by this canonical author, or lately a non-canonical author who happens to be a lesbian and a woman, and tell us about this, when in fact the humanities are our knowledge bank of how we are human as a collective. And young people need to share in that collective knowledge and gain the confidence to create their own interpretations of what it means to be human within a historical context in this society. And all the incentives are wrong for that. You know, I think Heather mentioned to me about Ian McGilchrist this morning. His book is amazing, the idea of the master and the emissary. I look at scientific thinking in many ways as the emissary that thinks it's the master, when in fact the holistic thinking provided only by humanistic thinking is really what needs to reassert itself. But we've failed. We've failed, and we've wanted to become pseudoscientists.
Now, this humanistic outlook, is there anything to... We've had so many questions. I've noticed, I think you probably have too, a degradation in just the sheer intellectual apparatus that kids at the age of 18 bring to college. They just don't know anything.
They can't write. There's a lot of remedial. There's no cultural sort of common language.
And that's very late.
Books that they've all read in high school. I mean, people can attack the idea of a core curriculum or the canon of the great books or whatever. But one thing it does provide is a common language for people in the cafeteria to sit around because they've all read Julius Caesar.
Right.
And they can have or Homer or what have you, and they can have a meaningful discussion about a shared experience. And if everyone on campus has completely different shared experiences with everyone else because no one's read the same books, then they're isolated within their major, and even within their major, they're isolated within a little silo that they have no connection to the other people on campus.
Yeah,
so it's not a university, it's a multiversity.
In public schools up to college, you do not read books anymore.
Yeah.
You get a book, and they break it into sections over a period of months, and you're only allowed to read these 2 chapters, then you're going to analyze them, then these 2 chapters. The idea that children would read not just 1 but 2, but 5 books a week, that is dead. It's not allowed.
And the whole books as opposed to an AI summary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so this gets back to not only universities, but gets back to public school education down at the lowest levels.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, too, that we're now raising up a generation that's entering college that missed 2 years of education.
Harvard just yesterday, the day before, published a report on grade inflation at Harvard. So 25% of people used to get A's. Now it's 60% of people get A's. So A's don't mean anything anymore. They don't set you into the top quartile. And one of the things this does, and of course the Harvard Crimson then published a story about the students crying about this, and it's so terrible, and they're going to start making these classes more rigorous, and you know, merit-based is coming back, and this is a bad thing. But one thing that merit-based education does, actually, and this speaks to I think some of the legitimate concerns of the DEI folks, is what happens when everyone at Harvard gets an A? Well, the only way to differentiate yourself from the pack is based on social connections and who you know and who your parents know and all of these non-merit-based factors that the universities are supposedly trying to get away from. So, like, if I'm a scrappy kid that didn't come from a prestigious prep school and don't have a wealthy family that has a lot of connections in the corporate world or the government world, how do I distinguish myself at Harvard? Well, I try to get an A. Well, that's not possible anymore because everyone's getting A's. So actually bringing back rigor, dialing back on the grade inflation, not treating the younger generation as though they're snowflakes, I think is a necessary piece of the universities regaining their footing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you know, you bring back a memory of my going to college and seeing how there was a certain class of people for whom this was a game, for whom this was a joke. And I tried to get my head around it because I had come from my family, which was, you're going to learn wonderful things, you're going to read wonderful books. And there were a bunch of people who came from largely very wealthy families for whom this was a game, that they were there for the connection to maybe get someone to marry, And, and this was at a very good
Trick the
college.
professor into thinking you know.
Thinking, in a pantomime between professor and student.
Join the right club, become part of the right
club,
set.
yeah.
So-
But I was going to say something. I spoke against orality in relative terms earlier on, but I think orality also has a very positive side. And I often talk, and Jeffrey and I have talked a lot over the years about the table as a place of socialization, at a place where you become a human being, where you learn how to read faces, where you learn how to listen to fragments. I mean, one of the things I noticed in my latter years of teaching was the increasing inability of students to take fragments of knowledge and give themselves the permission to bind together those fragments into something whole for themselves. Well, that's learned at a dinner table. At least it was when I was young. When you had multi-generations, I had my grandmother, I was hearing this story for the third time, noticing what different detail came in that time, and trying to explain to myself through these fragments what the whole was. Again, looking for the whole that I was giving myself the freedom to create out of her discourse or the combined discourses. Students come to us now with an inability to see themselves as creators of their own discourses, their own personal meaning making of the fragments that are given to them. But that's what it means to develop an identity in life. It's to know the fragments that you've been bequeathed and then to make something out of them in an alchemical way that is whole. It's really the only pursuit we have in life, if you think about it, if we want to be a centered person.
You know, in the early days of Turning Point, when it was just getting going and it turned into this massive movement, all over the country, where Charlie Kirk was, challenging people on campus and all that kind of stuff. In the early days, I was invited to speak, and I stood up in front of 500 kids, and I began to. My topic I chose was on the history of economic thought, which is probably the worst topic you could ever imagine. But the thing that struck me as I began to talk is that I couldn't say anything. Then there were about 400 kids there listening. I couldn't say anything that they recognized. And when you're talking in front of a group, you can tell whether or not people are connected with what you're saying. And I was speaking for 400 kids, and they all had these weird blank faces, and I couldn't say any names from history or any period of history or any incident in history that they registered any familiarity with whatsoever. And it was a total calamity. They didn't like me at all, which is fine. But I walked away from there thinking, who are these strange zombie kids with no knowledge whatsoever? As the years have gone on, I've thought a lot about Turning Point. What I realized what it was is that what Charlie was doing was taking in kind of refugees from a system that had failed them. These kids had never been taught anything, and yet they had a hunger for ideas.
Well, the old liberal arts ideal of a breadth of education and that can potentially create a common language, common culture, common sense of history has disappeared at the universities, probably starting in the 1960s, 1970s. And the purpose of the university is to create a managerialist class that doesn't necessarily have a sense of these things, but that can be efficient technicians of power, right? So why does everyone that goes to Harvard, and interested in only 4 professions, finance, law, medicine, and I'm forgetting the 4th, but it's, tech. I'm sorry, Silicon Valley, right? And so what do you need for people in those positions, kind of running those institutions, running those countries? You don't need people that have read Dante and Shakespeare or that have a sense of the history of economic theory or any of these other things, or even a solid sense of science. It's amazing how many people in medicine don't really understand
timeline of history, so
science.
You can't understand.
That's right.
You have no vision of anything that's ever happened.
Because their job is simply to implement what the machinery tells them needs to happen next.
On that note, I'll go on a bit of a rant about poli-sci, which is one of my favorite whipping boys. I hope I'm not offending too many political scientists in the audience. But I refer to poli-sci as empire studies, whose purpose is basically to create a vision of the world that is 30,000 feet above. And people here in this country are looking at the world from those 30,000 feet without having to engage with the messiness of the human life below. And it's no accident that poli-sci started at the end of the 19th century, the early part of the 20th century, just as England was leaving its empire or becoming weak and we were ascending on the world stage. Why study poli-sci? Why don't you study history and then the languages and the cultures and the ability to talk to the people with whom you're engaging in other places? The problem? You might humanize them too much. If you talk to them in your own languages within an intimate space, those will become something other than chess pieces looked at from the point of view of the burgeoning American empire. So it really serves a purpose of distancing. And I think you could make the case for a lot of other disciplines that make us simply instrumentalize people and save us from having to engage in intimate human engagement with them.
One of the remarkable things that the kids, even in finance or these other fields, discover once they leave college is that their degree actually has no real market value, and that if they're lucky enough to find a position, that's when their education begins. Now they have to start the credentialing process, and that can take years. And these private credentialing services are tough. I mean, you have to read, and you have to know stuff, and you have to actually pass the exams. And the exams are hard. And most people don't pass them, all right? And it's the only way you can advance. But kids come out of undergraduate with no knowledge that this is the way the real world works at all. And I guess my question is, like, at what point are we just going to say these 4 years are stupid? Like, maybe we should.
Well, I have children in high school, and just being in touch with a lot of high school parents at a private, the sort of private school world where most of these parents expect their children to go to Harvard. A lot of this is still driven by parents operating according to a paradigm which says you are a good parent if at the end of this 20-year-long, 18-year-long difficult project of raising children, you can put an Ivy League sticker on the back of your car.
But that's all the parents. That's all parents.
To get them out of that mindset. And
it's all parents have.
I mean, I've sent my 2 oldest kids to college. Number 3 is going to trade school. Number 4 and 5, they'll probably go to college. But if they don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
But I am an outlier. If I were to tell most parents at my children's high school that is my attitude toward higher education, they would look at me like I was an alien.
One of my best friends is a college counselor at one of the more prestigious high schools in Boston, private high school. And he would agree with everything you say. But he has spent the last 20 years trying to talk to parents and saying it's really about the education, the fit. Please don't insist that he apply here, there, and everyone else, where else. But the incentives for them to do anything other than that, after the parents have paid this money at this college, at this high school, are so overwhelming. So he's pulling his hair out every year. It's the same thing. He says, why don't we look at a reasonable place where your son, it's an all-boys school, where your son will be happy? And the parents won't hear it.
Yeah.
Because they need to keep alive the illusion that this is the ultimate crowning.
This is my validation
of
that
the upper middle class.
I've been a good parent.
The upper middle class dream.
Yeah.
Well, it's a trap, but parents, it's hard to avoid for parents. There's most parents, that's the only metric that they have in mind. Grades, success in school, and college admissions, and then you're done,
Yeah.
But how can you, with what's happened with the colleges, do you think that a larger percent of parents now are saying that it's a bad idea with the indoctrination to woke programming, to turning children away from religion? there's so much now that's a negative about college. Do you think it's impacting parents at all? Or is it just in our little tiny community here?
I wonder about this all the time. You know, I keep thinking the time that things are we're going to turn the corner and there's going to be a mass movement against all this nonsense. And not to mention the student debt.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think there are small enclaves of parents who are beginning to make that turn. Parents who have invested in homeschooling their own children. Right. For example, they're going to investigate, okay, if I'm coming from a Catholic or a Mormon or, you know, evangelical or whatever Jewish background where this is, the faith is something I'm trying to impart to my children. I'm going to look at colleges to see which ones really have a sort of authentic, whatever character that I'm trying to imprint upon my kids. I would say those parents are still in the minority, but the homeschooling movement, which has become more mainstreamed, has created, I think, more people that shop around for colleges with sort of a little bit more of their antenna up and don't just go based on U.S. News and World Report rankings.
For me,
they're a minority.
One of the strangest features of the COVID response was that it took homeschooling from being something of a sketchy, you know, under a cloud kind of activity and made it, you know, like practically mandatory for everybody for a year. It seems it's unbelievable that this actually happened. And that, as a consequence, you not only have millions of people homeschooling who were not previously homeschooling, it's now completely mainstream, and you have the foundation of all sorts of new private academies that popped up all over the country during the lockdown years.
Which unfortunately have led right back into the whole woke system of education, because when you look at what those academies are teaching, it's the same stuff that's going on in public school. And so if you're going to homeschool, don't use one of those academies. Yeah. Like, just don't do it, because they're really quite woke, most of them.
That's interesting.
And a lot of them are state-sponsored. A lot of them, certain states will actually try and drive parents into using these, and they're actually not always such a good idea.
Just one other thing. I'm sure some of you read the article that was circulating the last couple of weeks by Helen Andrews called The Great Feminization. I think there's another issue that really needs to be put on the table, which is this seems to be, the problems that are going on seems to be inordinately male, and that there's a system that it seems to have developed into a system that is overtly hostile to the many ways of being male. Yes. Yeah. And there's a great line from her article that says, you know, a woman can complain at the university now about men acting as if it were a frat house, but a boy or a man cannot complain about it being like a Montessori kindergarten.
Or a sorority.
And this is a real crisis, and I'm not trying to play team off against gender team off a gender team, but I think the male crisis, which, if you begin thinking about it, fits into a whole other set of objectives that certain powerful people might have in terms of taking control of a society. Obviously, society with men that are less confident in masculinity is probably going to be an easier society to take over. And just for reasons of anthropological realities and physical strength and certain tendencies of both. Men have been limit setters historically in society.
I think it certainly is one way to facilitate socialism. Yeah. When you have people who want to be in a collective, who want to cooperate, who want to get along, who don't necessarily feel the need to protect, but instead, you know, want to cooperate. Which I think is happening. Yeah. Yeah.
We should then. I've suddenly realized that maybe I should have invited Nicholas Tucker. I don't know if you've met this young boy over here. It's my son. He can tell stories. Maybe during cocktail hour, huh, Nicholas? In the old days, in the progressive era, there was a great emphasis on universal education with a canon of books, you know, the great books and that sort of thing. I've often looked back at those things and thought, you know, this is a pretty solid education in here, and it seems to be missing, and actually like disappeared, if not entirely gone.
Entirely, yeah. There's a handful of colleges here and there that still do it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Would you? I know, Tom, you're a little dark about this subject, and maybe a little bit like you knew it. This is a form of cultural planning, I know. But
No, you'd be surprised at my answer. But
oh, okay, all right. Surprise me then. What's your answer? I like the great.
I'm someone who lived through the so-called canon wars in the university. And the canon wars are based on a flawed premise, that the canon is what you will become. So the idea that if I provide you with a canon that has certain values reflected, therefore you will become a carbon copy of those values, which of course is based on an absurd premise that there is no free will in interacting with what you're reading in the canon.
I see.
So I'm vigorously pro-canon.
Okay.
It needs to be always changing, but it needs to be something solid, because we can only go out into the world from something solid.
Exactly.
And people can only think and argue with the world and against the world from a place. Mm-hmm. If you have people that have never been put in a place, if you will, through canonical readings, they have no point of departure.
That is true.
They have no languages with which they can engage the problems in their lives.
That's right.
I'm very much in favor.
I see.
Also based on the
canonical
premise that the
education.
canon conveyed a set of homogenous values, whereas,
true.
I'm sorry, Aristotle and Augustine did not say the same things that Freud and Nietzsche said. They said very often diametrically opposed things. So exposing yourself to that set of ideas was actually exposing yourself to thinkers who very often were in strong disagreement, strong argument with one another, which taught people how to look at two sides of a particular issue.
How to think.
Yeah.
This is what terrified me about speaking in front of those poor Turning Point kids. So you realize they have no basis. There's nothing there from which to begin the process of
no foothold
of serious
Common
thought
language.
about anything, really.
And the ability to write an essay isn't just gone within our 18-year-olds. Try to get anybody to write an essay is very difficult now. They just don't know how to do it,
The only common set of
well,
stories...
you know that, trying to get writers for Brownstone, I'm sure. The number of people who actually follow through with writing an essay.
Sure. I write a column every day for Epoch Times, and it's read by millions of people. And I love Epoch. It's the most, what a great piece of literature it is. It comes every week, but even every day, it's just great literature. I mean, and by any standard. But I'm more and more feeling this kind of need to keep alive good literature. And so I talk about books. I link to the book. We have Gutenberg, Gutenberg.org, I guess it's called, which has millions of books for free you can download. And actually, if you want to read, I remember when the Gutenberg.org came along, I thought, that's it. All of society is going to become literate now. All books are free. Wow, we solved all the problems.
No, but you have to read. Typically, most people need to read as part of a community to help them motivate. To keep going and to persevere. It's a long-term project to invest into a book, and then to understand it, you need to be in conversation with other people who are reading it as well. And the only common language of stories that we seem to have today, going back to Walter's presentation, is tentpole movies that lots of people go and see. So film has become sort of the one space in which we can tell stories that enough people are familiar enough with that you can make cultural references to Mission Impossible films or to comic book films.
Yeah, but this is not real stuff.
But it's pretty thin. It's thin gruel.
Yeah.
And I love films, but if those are the only stories that we can tell, then we're going to live in a pretty thin culture.
Yeah.
Just one other thing. We started off, or at least I started off, talking about the loss of the transcendent, or the pointing toward the ghost in the machine of education. Insofar as we see the world, and I do, as an increasingly transactional place, and people trapped in its transactionality without a transcendent desire or ability to go beyond it, those things, come from a couple of things in my view. Textual analysis, in which you learn to think about what is not spelled out on the page and imagine for yourself what might be there. And that's a liberating process that comes from close reading. But also, in terms of transcendence, you need to start with the way other people have imagined arriving at the world of the transcendent. And again, that doesn't mean you're indoctrinating to a certain religious faith. It means that you're making available a language. Pick the one that's more culturally comfortable for your family or your individual. But at least it's something that points to the idea of something beyond the transactional world in which we live in.
Yeah.
And these languages, if we don't have, a young person doesn't have that language, they begin to realize the world is a purely material transactional space.
Aaron, you said earlier that and I know we're over time, but just quickly, you said something about that reading should be a community activity or a group like.
I mean, for years I had a book club with some married friends, and we had half a dozen married couples, and all the books that we wish we would have read but never got around to. So Homer, Dante, Solzhenitsyn, and all the rest.
The Picture
of
Dorian Gray.
Great books. The picture. We didn't get to Oscar Wilde.
What?
If we would have kept going, we would have gotten there. But I'm going to read these books on my own because that's just what I like to do. But most of the people in that reading group would not have otherwise read those books, but motivated every month to sort of persevere and get through the Purgatorio or the Paradiso, if not for the fact that we're getting together and we're going to be doing this.
But it's just suddenly occurs to me, Jill, do you agree with what Aaron said? I mean,
I actually don't agree. I mean, as a child, I read probably thousands of books, and I never talked to anybody about them, but that was the background of my education because I learned very little in public school.
But you like the idea of a reading group?
Oh, I love the idea of discussing books, but I don't think that's the only way that you need to read.
I agree. Okay. Well, so it just occurred to me that if we're looking for ways to dig ourselves out of this cultural pit, that maybe Aaron's idea is a good one, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you have done this. You've gotten together with your adult friends and picked a single book and read it and gone through it, and it doesn't have to be the Purgatorio, for God's sake. Although, maybe that's good. By the way, I've always wanted to take a course in Dante.
We didn't read it in Italian, so we tried to make it accessible. It wasn't, too highbrow.
Yeah. St. John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul. But maybe there's a point to establishing small reading groups where people read Laura Delano's book, which I think is a brilliant work, actually, or your book, there's something all of us can do, and gosh, I don't think I've ever been invited to be a part of a book reading group, but I think I would.
Isn't that funny? Because as a woman, women have book reading clubs all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, oftentimes their book selection leaves something to be desired.
Absolutely.
Too much Oprah.
The Oprah Winfrey model is not for everybody.
Well, thank you, Jill, Tom, and Aaron, and thank you for a wonderful day. Let's and tomorrow, those of you who are staying for the dinner tonight, we'll see you shortly. And those of you who are not coming to dinner tonight, keep an eye out for Jay Bhattacharya. Again, he had to move heaven and earth to get here, and we're very excited to see him. And I look forward to seeing you then tomorrow. Thank you so much. That was a good panel. I didn't know where we're going to.